Hey, I don't have much time left. What's up? It's the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite albums, and of course, it is January, and that means I'm going to talk about great albums, fantastic albums, and today I'm going to do a review on The Microphones, The Glow Part 2. So, I have a lot of albums to review. I have a lot of old albums from the 70s, 80s, and 90s to review. But I picked this one, which is an album released in 2001 by the band The Microphones from the state of Washington, where it's all just cold, stern forests and dreamy, depressing giant roads. I've been there, even though I'm not from there. And the Microphones is fronted by a guy named Phil Elverum. And after dropping Mount Erie, the album, by the Microphones, he actually became Mount Erie himself, becoming the artist under the alias. And in 2017, he dropped A Crow Looked at Me, which became my favorite album of 2017, where he sort of explores the theme of death in the most realistic and grounded way possible because his ex-wife passed away because of cancer, and it's honestly one of the most haunting and just depressing albums I've ever heard. It is one of the three most depressing albums of the decade. We have A Crow Looked at Me, Sun Kill Moon's Benji, and an album that I've just talked about, Sufjan Stevens' Carrie and Lowell. And so the Microphones, their music is noisy, very lo-fi, crappy recording, but they also make folk music, very gentle, very minimalist folk music infused with noise rock and indie rock, and also sometimes ambient and drone, which is this really interesting and unique combination, unique and interesting enough to be considered a classic album. And yes, this may not be everyone's album, but this is personally one of my favorite albums of all times. First of all, the most special thing about this album is that it is very, very lo-fi and noisy. The production is very rough, sometimes very messy, and it actually makes this album even more fragile and broken, and I just really love that vibe. And it's very unique. It came out in 2001, and back then, noisy music wasn't really all that popular of a thing. This album paved the way for noisy, lo-fi folk. And the instrumentals on this album and the lyrical themes on the album, they're very, very depressing and lonely. But instead of just talking about, feelings, my feelings, this happened, that happened, Phil's lyrics are very abstract, metaphorical, and it is very haunting and very moving and powerful as well, enough to make you think about it over and over again after listening to the song. And Phil singing on this album is actually very, very, very weak, very fragile and vulnerable. His voice is so gentle and so soft and tender. It's beautiful. It's harmless, it's innocent, yet when there's pressure on his vocals, he cracks up, he's near dead. And the melodies on this album, they are sticky, they're memorable, but also they are absolutely sad. And this is the album. It's a huge album. It is the Microphones' magnum opus. It is 20 tracks long, 1 hour and 6 minutes long, and it starts off with I Want Wind to Blow, which is a very humble beginning for the album, a very stripped back, very comforting and warm guitar ballad. We get some really innocent and harmless dueling guitars, and we also get some springy percussion, which is really quiet and slow. And we also get the vocals, which are fantastic. They're so intimate, they're so fragile, and they're absolutely beautiful. I want wind to blow. There's no black or white, no change in the light, no night, no golden sun. There are all sorts of lyrics about wind and night and rain and sun, and it's all very natural, very grounded in earth, and it just feels primal conceptually, but kinda just innocent, harmless, but also with a tinge of sadness, which then amplifies later this album. And I just really love the atmosphere generated by this song. It sounds like a really humble sunrise. And if you have seen my Europe videos, in the episode where I went to Suomenlinna, an island in Helsinki, Finland, I actually use this song because I thought it's just very fitting given how peaceful and quiet and sort of natural this island is. But anyways, I digress. Back to the album. The second track is the title track, The Glow Part 2, and it starts off with some really crushing, epic, distorted guitar riffs, just bow, 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 bow. And then afterwards, the crushing guitar riffs, they fade, and we get some really downtrodden guitars that just feel washed out. It's like you're being haunted and dragged down by these past memories and traumas, but you have to keep on going because that's just how life works, and you're just following whatever the world brings you to without any purpose in life. And at first, the track has rhythm, it has a really sticky melody, but in the middle of the song, the rhythm just ends. The rhythm ends, and it just breaks down to a very stripped back skeletal part where it's just Phil Elverum singing in the most fragile and epic way possible, singing, "My heart beats loudly, my blood flows harshly, my blood flows harshly." And this is one of those rare moments in music where I, as a listener, feel absolutely fragile. As a human being, I'm just nothing in comparison to the grand scheme of the universe. I'm just gonna get crushed. I'm so small and so weak and so humble. It's very haunting, very haunting and powerful. And at the very end, in spite of the mortality that we are facing straight on, with the incredibly powerful lyrics, the guitars, they sort of seep in very smoothly, and it's almost like a sigh at the end, like, yes, we're weak, we're fragile, we may die anytime at any given moment, but that's just how life works, and everyone's just like that every day. And then we have the third track, The Moon, which is my favorite Microphones track, my favorite track on the album, and one of my favorite songs of the 2000s, also one of my favorites of all times. The track starts off with some really crunchy and sort of sweet, but also rough and sad guitars that's just very stringy and smooth. And just when you think this track is going to go that way for the entire duration, at the 1 minute and 12-second mark, Phil's vocals and these powerful, noisy, wholesome rock instrumentals just strike onto the track, crashing it. And it's one of the most, I guess, eardrum satisfying, orgasmic moments I've ever had, ever. And it's gorgeous, it's absolutely powerful. We get some droning organs, these horns that are just funeral marching band horns. And we also get these subdued vocals, which are so weak, it's completely overshadowed and masked over by these very loud and noisy and wholesome and warm rock instrumentals, and it sounds so traumatic. It sounds so painful, but yet it keeps on going and keeps on moving, and it sort of has this hope, this faith in the future, even though the protagonist of this song, I guess, already has accepted his fate, that he doesn't have a future anymore. And it's really, really moving, very haunting, and it's like a love song, but a very abstract one at that. Anyways, afterwards we have the track Headless, Horseman, and it's one of these somber, sad ballads on the album. Very guitar driven, and it's very honest, very frank, very sincere. And even though the lyrics, they're very esoteric, they're all over the place, talking about returning from hell, things outside the house, they feel real, personal, and grounded. It has a lot of emotion embedded in the lyrics, and it's very beautiful. And afterwards, we have the track My Roots Are Strong and Deep, which is also a ballad, like the previous track, except it's this sleepy, piano-backed, gospel-esque anthem. And again, the lyrics, they're absolutely interesting, talking about being a tree with its roots growing strong and deep. And the pianos on this track, they're drony, they're buzzing, and it's another fantastic track on the album. So far, so good. Very solid. But the album sort of melts down a little bit at this point, where we start to get some more abstract instrumental bass tracks. We have the track Instrumental, where it's just some lonely finger-picked guitars, and then later on the track we get some reverbed finger snaps, some claps, and also some gentle fluttering pianos, which builds this very amazing, natural, but also fragile and downtrodden imagery and atmosphere. And then we have the mansion, which is a little longer, and we get this wall of fluttering acoustic guitars that just goes on and on and on, almost droning. And then at the end of the track, Phil Elverum sort of seeps in and starts singing these very poetic lyrics in such stone cold manner. And there's this very, very quiet layer of vocals underneath his vocals, and it's also him, but it's so quiet and so faint. It's almost like there's a ghost behind Phil Elverum while he's singing, just sort of creeping in, except the ghost isn't there to kill him or anything, because it's there to represent, I guess, the past traumas. And then we have two tracks, both named Something, with brackets. The first track is this very, very quiet track where I feel like I'm being transported into this very dark, dreamy, grainy space where I see just cellos floating in space, and they're just talking. They're talking, but they're cellos, so the sounds they make are very deep and sorrowful, but they're talking. They're having a conversation, and a really solemn one at that. And it's Lynchian, actually. Evokes vivid imagery. And then we have the second track, Something, the second Something track, which is this really ominous and unsettling wall of buzzing electric guitars, which feels broken and distorted. And then afterwards, we return to the album with its melodies on the track I'll Not Contain You, which is also a guitar-backed ballad, which is really soft, mellow, and also messy. Again, we get some layered vocals, which are beautiful. The vocal harmonies are fantastic, and sometimes Phil even sings in a manner as if he's singing in reverse, but he's not. And again, sounds really weird and a little disorienting, but that's the uniqueness that I love about this track. And then we have the Gleam Part 2, which is a very stone cold track where throughout the entire track we get this very constant, prominent, punching, slapping percussion and piano, just gung, 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 gung. We get the vocals that are very weak, and they're completely overshadowed by these very funeral-esque slams. And at the end, the instrumentals, they turn sour and it gets intense and it's so emotional. But it's the next track, Map, that really got me. The first time I listened to the album, I wasn't a huge fan of it, even though the first 3 tracks are my absolute favorites. But Map is now one of my favorites on the album as well. Oh my gosh, this track, oh my gosh. This track is drony. We get some towering drones that are so cinematic and so epic. And it's so final. Listening to this song is like facing and accepting your own fate and the fact that you're about to die. You're about to reach the end of your timeline, and you just have to accept it because it's the greater scheme of the universe. But also, listening to this track sounds like being pushed to the edge of the world or being launched into the top of the top of the top of the world. There's this rush of fear and brokenness, but also adventure in the droning keyboards of this track. It's also sort of like having faith and hope about another world that exists in another universe or in a parallel timeline, and the only way to access that is to die, is to have your existence erased from your timeline right now. And that's the level of cinema I'm talking about when listening to this track. The layered vocals, they are so, they're so fragile, and they are so, they leave a hole inside you. And in the middle of the track, even though it sounds super desperate, it just breaks down into this marching instrumental, just bung 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 bung. But the vocals, they're just so epic and drawn of the life force. Oh, the sun, my bending back. Oh my, towards the foothills rise. And the airy, drony keyboards at the end, they're so crunchy and swift, and the constantly fluttering pianos at the end, such a nice touch. Damn. And then the amazingness doesn't end here. We have You'll Be in the Air, which is this really modest ballad about being in the air, being on an airplane. You'll be in the air, and for hours you'll be over the sea. It's constantly ascending, and whenever Phil sings, You'll be in the air, these springy guitars just chomp in very nicely. And then in the middle of the track, the rhythm disappears once again, and Phil's vocals become super wild and raw and emotional. It's actually magical. And then we have the track I Want to Be Cold, which is this very straightforward noise rock track that's super loud, but also kind of sad. And it just has this really quiet ending. And we also get a very noisy track towards the end of the album, Samurai Sword, which is hellish, nightmarish, and super noisy. So much so that you start to realize that the melodies of the track, the guitars, the chords, they don't matter. They don't friggin' matter anymore. And Phil's vocals, they definitely don't matter. They're there, and they're absolutely overshadowed by the horrifying presence of these droning guitars. Afterwards, we have I Am Bored, which is it's similar to I Want to Be Cold, but I guess not as noisy, more rhythmic. And we also get these really lovely warm piano lines, which are amazing. But towards the end of the album, these pianos, they just shift to become a very horrifying tornado of noise. And then we have I Felt My Size, also one of my favorite tracks on the entire album. We get some very innocent guitars in the beginning, but of course, within just the guitar line, in the line itself, it turns bitter. It's so bitter and so pained. It's like darkness is seeping in into a wall of plain white light, or maybe vice versa. Maybe it's just pure darkness and dread, but a little bit of light just seeps in, and it's wow. Yeah, the ending, of course, it's noisy with the romping percussion and the glistening pianos. It's beautiful. And then we have the second instrumental track, instrumental 2, which maybe is the weakest track, which may be the weakest track on the entire album. We get some loose pianos and guitars and hand drums in 4/3 time signature. And it's not bad though, it does create a pretty interesting atmosphere, but it's the next track that lightens the mood with I Felt Your Shape, which is basically a reprise of You'll Be in the Air, except it's more acoustic, more accessible, more light and fluffy, and a very, very fun song to sing along to. And then, of course, we have Samurai Sword, the very noisy, hellish, nightmarish, tormented second to last track, and we have the last track, My Warm Blood. And it's 9 minutes long. It's nearly 9 minutes long, but the only part that matters in this track is the first 2 minutes, where it's this incredibly final, solemn goodbye. We get these guitars, which just sounds like finally accepting your own fate, and it just sounds very solemn. It's yeah, and we get lyrics about the power being out, the sun's going down, and he's only feeling insects flying like he's about to die. And then the track abruptly ends, and we get 7 minutes of near silence, except we get these thumps once in a while. These very, very quiet, numbing thumps. Just bong. And it's sort of like a heartbeat. And when these thumps are happening throughout the entire 7 minute of silence, we also get some very, very faint recordings of the first track, I Want Wind to Blow, but they're so faint, it's almost like they're fake. It's almost like you're listening to them, you're listening to it because your mind is trying to trick you. And at the end, it just drops dead. It becomes absolutely silent. The thumping drums, they're gone. And it sounds like the protagonist of the album just died, passed away. He had reached the last moment in his life, and it's now nothing. It's absolute nothing, blank, and that is death. It's blank. It's nothing. It's nothing dark, dreamy, magical. It's nothing beautiful and euphoric. It's nothing. Blank. And yeah, just a very powerful ending to the album that just leaves you speechless. And this album overall leaves me speechless as well. One of my favorite albums of all times. And yeah, it's 9 p.m. and I need to have dinner. So my favorite track here is The Moon, and my least favorite is instrumental 2. Yeah, I really, really, really love this album. Very creative, haunting, but also sad and broken, and a lot of painful moments as well. Yeah, I'm feeling a 10 out of 10 for the album. A 10, perfect score. I don't know. So, yeah, have you listened to Microphones, The Glow Part 2, from 1 to 10, how much it's rated? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. Up next, I may review My Bloody Valentine.